So we've discussed ad nauseum on this channel what the state of the modern day visual art scene looks like, right? Not so much the visual art scene that takes place in galleries and in museums, but here on the internet, right? There are endless think pieces written about what's hitting the galleries and the trendy areas look like. I honestly think, well, it's an interesting conversation and one that I've looked into. I don't think it's the most interesting conversation because it's hard for me to look at the seemingly infinite number of artists making interesting things on the internet and then look at the galleries and be like, this is what is going on right now. You know, just because somebody lives in New York and makes sculptures doesn't make them a sculptor, which is oftentimes what I feel like the attitude of this sort of dialogue ends up looking like, right? I want to discuss today not so much the symptoms of the modern day art scene that's taking place on the internet, right? But more so try to diagnose it, right? I think we've given a lot of talk to the symptoms, to what's going on, to the annoyances and the good parts and the bad parts, but what does it look like right now and what will they look back on the modern work being done as? I think the first thing we should mention first and foremost is the lack of identity, right? I think that's almost, and this is an oxymoronic thing to say, but I think that's almost the most striking thing about this whole operation is that there is no look and feel to it that you can really pin down in terms of motifs, in terms of people making similar things. You know, I wouldn't say there's one singular movement going on right now. I would actually say that the movement is better defined by the lack of a cohesive idea, right? And that is the internet after all. I also think that, and I'm not going to pay too much lip service to the local stuff, the high art, more traditional institutional art scenes. I'm not going to pay too much lip service to it here, but I do think it's interesting. This is one of the few elements that really does have crossover between this stage we're at, the internet and art, and the institutional sort of scene, right? There's no look, there's no feel. A lot of people are still painting the same way that they would paint 20 years ago. You know, we don't have a pop art that's like, okay, this is the look of this decade. If anything, I would say that the look is almost one of everything coming back into the fray on the internet, where everybody's doing everything, you know. There's, of course, the famous guys that are like Basquiat clones that are making stuff in that vein, you know. There's a lot going on. And I think that's probably the most striking aspect about this, is that there is a lot going on, right? When they look back on these movements, or on this scene that we find ourselves in right now in the future, I don't think they'll look at it as like it had this look and feel. I think they'll look at it more so of how is it getting around, why is it getting around in that regard, and not so much the aesthetic of what it looks like, which is obviously the most common thing in visual arts. I also think that hand in hand with that aesthetic is a sort of a movement to being only aesthetics as a whole, right? This is something we discussed fairly recently in an episode where it feels as though with the way that things are getting around, with the internet, aesthetics are everything. Substance has 100% fallen behind to how marketable something is, what the aesthetics of it look like, and what statement can those aesthetics make on first impression, right? We're very much in that zone right now where I wouldn't say that substance is what gets you to be at the top anymore, because like the top is completely defined off who's clicking, right? There's also this big thing going on that I think a lot of people get very annoyed with that I don't think is a huge feature of it. I think is more coming along with this move towards aesthetics as the only remaining feature that matters, where people are being like, the art these days is more about the artist than the art itself, right? You'll see a lot of guys who are like basically just thirst trapping next to their art and putting up short form content that are doing amazing and probably are doing way better with their art than most other people just because they're able to do that, right? People are looking at it, of course, in very with a very annoyed way, right? And I think that makes sense. I mean, if you're somebody who likes painting and you see somebody doing a TikTok dance next to their painting, of course you're going to be like, this is stupid. Not too dissimilar from how people might feel about this series of like, this guy is trying to be a painter, but he keeps talking, right? I've gotten that before. And I think that that makes sense as a reaction from people who are there for the painting. But I do think more so that this won't be seen as like, oh, the personification of paintings is now only in the personality of the artist. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that we're just reaching a zone where aesthetics are everything. Aesthetics are all that matters, right? So I think what we're, the two things that we're going to be looking at here in the future as we diagnose this art scene that we're in right now is a movement away from one uniform look, one uniform idea. There's nothing that everybody is painting, right? I would say the subject matter is very different. A lot of what's seen as the most innovative art is exploring the internet and modern life. So I guess maybe that could be seen as something there in terms of like an overarching theme. However, I would still say that the only reason this is an overarching theme is once again not because of a centralized look or a centralized feel, but more so because when they look back at how all this stuff got around, you can't make a painting and post on the internet without the internet and the commentary between traditional arts and these new digital mediums somewhere being in that conversation, right? The internet being the gallery, framing everything, is inherently causing a conversation. And I think that conversation is taking the front seat, and that's why aesthetics are the only other thing that matters, because how far can you get is kind of propelling how far the conversation gets, right? So no unified look and feel, aesthetics are everything now. I think these are two statements I'm pretty comfortable with saying that that are features of this new art scene, right? The last one that I want to talk about here is perhaps a little bit strange, but I think that it's true. I think this is the way they'll look back on it. I think that inherently the nature of this modern art scene is that everything is ephemeral art now, right? And I think this is bizarre at first, right? Because that is just like factually not true. A painting is not ephemeral art. A painting exists forever. For those of you who maybe don't know, ephemeral art is an art piece that kind of happens, right? Where it's a fleeting moment, maybe it's an action, something like that, right? And I don't think, obviously, I don't say this in a literal sense. I don't think that literally everything is now ephemeral art. I think that'd be really dumb to say. There's lots of people posting paintings and sculptures and process videos, and that is not ephemeral, right? However, I do think that the manner in which we are consuming art nowadays makes it ephemeral because everything becomes so fleeting in this landscape, right? If you have a favorite artist, you probably won't have favorite paintings by them. You just like their art and you are seeing it constantly. And like, I mean, that's why so many artists are posting so often, right? I feel like you have to be always on and showing new stuff almost daily to really be relevant now, right? And I think that makes it ephemeral in a roundabout sense. I'm using ephemeral not because I think it's the word I'd like to diagnose this with, but rather because I think that it's the most accurate word you can use, right? I think this is a new phenomenon that kind of goes almost as an umbrella over everything we've been talking about, over the internet being the way this is getting around, over that creating this scene of just aesthetics and all these things. I think it's because it's so ephemeral, it's so fleeting. You know, what is the difference between you walking by an event happening and you scrolling your feed? Of course, one's physical, one's digital, but in terms of memory, in terms of resonance, right? The art becomes ephemeral when you do that. It's fleeting, it only exists for you in those seconds, and you keep moving on, right? This is one of the reasons I think it's actually so hard for artists to garner a following, because whereas in the past you could make a great painting and ride off that like for a long time, like they made that painting, that's insane. I mean, every artist you can think of probably has the thing, right? Andy Warhol, the soup can. Picasso has a Guernica, which I always mispronounce, right? But like we look back and we're like, they did that, they're a genius. That just can't happen on social media now, right? It's not how anything works on social media. The people that win on social media are not people that made the best thing and you go, wow, they did that. They're people that are consistently putting out good stuff that people want to keep watching, right? So because of that, art is forced to become a constant stream of new things to keep people watching. And I think in that sense, it is almost more accurate to view careers, to view these things as ephemeral, constant living pieces of art that are always changing to capture more attention, right? I don't think people are making bodies of work anymore. I think they're making one painting in this modern landscape. Now, what is the practical side of actually talking about all this, right? I think this is I think it'd be wrong not to end the video asking this question, because there is obviously a motivation to be like, okay, that's what's going on right now. I'm going to try and copy it, right? I mean, I've tried to do this in the past. I'm not going to pretend I haven't, right? This is what feels like it's going on right now. I should tap into the core of that and just try and be successful based off that. And actually, I'm kind of making this because I think the opposite is true. I think the next wave is not going to be through people who are able to tap into this. I think actually the fact that we can somewhat adequately come here and prescribe certain things to this modern scene means that it's probably already on its way out. It's on its last legs already. By the time you can name something, I think it's usually done. Maybe a wrong take, but that's kind of the way I look at things. I think that what we should all be trying to do is trying to divert that, right? I think we should all be trying to go the opposite direction of this. Art is constantly ephemeral and all about aesthetics now. How do you make something that's long-lasting, resonant, that, you know, I still don't think we're anytime soon going to see a place where you can make one thing and be like, wow, they made that piece, they're a genius. But how do you maybe make a body of work that is more coherent then and allows for, over the course of these aesthetics to happen, that you know, sort of shift around on social media in this way, how can you make that say something, right? I think that the people who are able to do that, who are able to build, and maybe, you know, obviously we touched on it before lately, how like, oh, it's more about the artist and the art these days. How do you use that to your advantage, right? How do you take these things and turn them into substance and turn them into long-lasting, resonant things that take the aesthetics and go deeper with them than just making something now where the only place you can get substance is if your aesthetics are so literal that substance has to come with it and it shoves in people's faces, right? I think that's what the next wave of people who want to be doing well should be doing, because I don't think there's anything cool about just tapping into the way that social media is working right now. I mean, look at all the things that we have discussed in this series. They're pretty shitty, right? We want to make it better, not worse. That's where I think the future lies. This is the painting, new color palette today. There's something in here that that's definitely there, but I failed to do today. But I think there's like something that's going to be really cool about this color palette once I get it to work. Because this blue has so much depth to it. This red is actually coincidentally the exact same red as the last one, which it was not by design. It just happened that way. Like, this is a cool thing, and I want to figure out how to use it right, because I feel like there's something in here. There's a lot of texture in these colors, right? So yeah, go check this out over on Instagram, and until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint Talk episode 207. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.